let me start with this slide. This is just a summary of my understanding of what energy security is. We can see here that these Venn diagrams represent access to energy and the affordability of that access. Where they intersect, it's a fraction of the population that not only has access to energy, but also affordability to that access. On the two extremes, X and Y, we can see those that are constrained by income, even though access is available, and those that have no income constraint, but they're constrained by infrastructure. And as a result, you sum the X and Y, it gives you energy poverty. So in my view, the biggest policy pursuit in terms of energy security, it's about expanding the size of A square. So A square, double A, energy access affordability. So the bigger the portion, the greater the success. I mean, we may not see that happen in our lifetime, but the goal ultimately is to match these two cycles, right? That the access cycle overlaps the affordability cycle so that there is universal access and there is universal affordability. But there is a third Venn diagram that seems invincible that you may want to ask. And that's the one to the right of affordability. It's not intersecting with any, but it's tangent to the affordability. And that's no access. No access, no affordability, kind of. So just to keep things simple. Now, this, what I'll be presenting, the summary of the outline. We talk about the situation, energy situation, the dream, what we hope to achieve, and what is deemed appropriate. And then let's have some understanding about the energy sector in question and the grimness of that sector and the price we're paying for that grimness, and what are the efforts attempt at reversing that grimness, and why do these efforts have not yielded significant results, or what results have they yielded, and what are the pathways to dispelling the darkness, which is brightening, lightening everywhere possible. So this graph is one of the famous graphs in energy policy. I don't know, maybe some of you have not seen, but it's widely cited by lots of top magazines, Washington Post, The Economist, Bloomberg, and a lot of people use it. So Todd Moss first came up with this graph. I've worked under him when I was with the Center for Global Development. He currently leads Energy for Growth Hope. So he came up with this graph 10 years ago. And the idea behind it was he went out to shop for his fridge and he saw a label at the back of the fridge, how much energy the fridge would consume for a whole year. And that gave him the idea to put this in perspective. So while there is abundance of energy here, there is scarcity of it in a vast fraction of the world, especially the global south. So let me just share something.
If you're watching this, you probably have abundant and reliable electricity. You have enough energy to use the internet anytime and power all your appliances. Your job probably relies on 24/7 electric power. If you're in Europe, China, or Malaysia, you probably use 5,000 kilowatt hours per year. If you live in Canada, Australia, or the United States, you probably use more than 10,000 kilowatt hours. But what would your life look like without that level of electricity? For more than 3 billion people around the world, it's not hard to imagine. It's a reality called energy poverty. Fortunately, the world has pledged to end energy poverty by delivering electricity to everyone. The problem is the goal is just 100 kilowatt hours per person per year. That's enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. With 100 kilowatt hours of electricity, you can have lights at home, maybe a fan. You can charge your cell phone, most of the time, but service is spotty. Your community might have basic health clinics and schools, but the power goes out for days or weeks at a time. That's why the Energy for Growth Hub is raising global energy ambitions. We established the modern energy minimum. Every person deserves at least 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year.
Just keep at the back of your mind the
1,000 kilowatt hours means all kinds of new jobs that pay more and grow the economy. The modern energy minimum means a better life, more opportunity, and a brighter future. But this is only the beginning. Ultimately, everyone should reach 5,000 or even 10,000 kilowatt hours. A high-energy, low-carbon future would be life-altering. Abundant, reliable electricity can fuel sustainable growth across industry, education, and healthcare. It can unleash the human creativity and ingenuity the world needs. Let's not just aim for lighting. Let's aim for the new global standard of at least 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Now, why focus on Nigeria when we're talking about energy in Africa? Nigeria is the dominant country on the continent, using two indicators: the size of its population and the size of the economy. In fact, the size of Nigeria's economy is more than the size of 31 economies on the continent combined. So imagine the prosperity you would channel to the continent if Nigeria's power is fixed. Now, this just to give you a summary of Nigeria's energy system. Until 2005, everything was run by the government. Generation, transmission, and distribution across the value chain. And when democracy returned in 1999, a series of reforms were embarked upon by the government that came into power at the time. And that unbundled the energy system into 8 companies. 6 were in charge of generation, or you call them GenCos. They are privatized. They are privately owned. The transmission is just one company, still public, owned by the government. And the distribution, which we call them DISCOs, 11 of them were also privatized. The power generation is powered by gas plants and hydro plants. But the gas plant is over 70% in fraction in terms of the contribution to the generation. And then there is an agency of government called the NBET, the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Company. So when the power is generated, they use public purchase agreement, PPA, and what that means is they purchase the energy at prefixed price regardless of what would happen in the future. And then they sell these energies to the distribution companies, and the distribution companies now retail them out to end users. Then the customer base, there are roughly 40 million households in Nigeria, and in the UK, roughly 22 million households, but the household sizes are different, right? In UK, the average household size is 2 point something. In Nigeria, is 7 point something. So it makes sense. Over 70 million. The customer base has risen. Like, we've put many people in the net to be able to have access to the grid. And domestic households are the major consumers. For industrial and commercial, roughly 40%. And the industry is regulated by Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission. Now, here is the grimness of the situation. National access, that is after a series of reform, access increased to roughly 59% of the population, and 60% rural. So over 70% of the rural population have no access to the national grid. And in total, the population of Nigeria without access to the national grid is about 2 times the population size of the UK. UK is 60-something million people, so we're talking of almost 100 million. We have an installed capacity of 16.5 gig, the generation capacity of 12.5. So as we move down the value chain, the final energy being discharged along the way has shrunk significantly. And there are averagely 20 outages a month lasting 6 hours, right? Now, what happens when the grid is powerless? The grid is intended to evacuate power from the generating plants and transmit them. So what happens when the grid is weak, when the grid is powerless? So the grid collapses on average about 10 times a year, and that will bring about national blackout. Now, businesses in the country have to insure against the national grid. So they generate power using generators, self-generate their own power. And they're spending quite a lot, over $13 billion. In one of the estimates they spend on buying gasoline to power their generators to render services. So now you notice I've not mentioned anything about net zero, green carbon. We're still battling with powering the grid, let alone greening the grid, right? Even though we contribute very small fraction to greenhouse carbon emission. Now, one of the problems, like I said, is the power is lost along the way. The power that is generated is not the power that is delivered in terms of volume. Substantial part of it is lost between transmission and distribution. Now, it's a whole lot question what is behind these losses and what can be done to address these losses. But you can see a striking spot here when the power loss is at its peak and it starts falling down. That's when democracy returned to the country in 1999. But I cannot make claim that it was democracy that shrank with this thing. And then in 2013, when the generation and the distribution arms of the value chains were privatized, we can see that around that period is pretty flat. There is no significant jump in how much energy went to final users, right? So the question is always out there, whether at all the distribution really helped. But as one would expect, when there was fall in how much the energy is lost, we can see too that the consumption has risen. So when we're able to block leakages, we increase the availability of power. So one way to raise how much energy is available is to block the leakages. Now, like I said, efforts have been on the way. Initial efforts led to the privatization of the generation and distribution arms. But recently, there is this Electricity Act that also opened the door for private investors and state actors, other stakeholders, so subnational levels like states and local governments. 36 states in the country are allowed to have access to invest in the transmission. So previously, the government said, okay, the transmission is only government. Now, transmission, you can come and invest in the transmission. And states that make up the country are also allowed to invest in the energy industry. And so this bill just came to fruition, but our fingers are crossed rooting for what would happen. Now, Lagos State, which is Nigeria's commercial capital, and in terms of population size is twice the population of Scotland. They are trying to take advantage of this Power Act of 2023. Some investors have expressed interest there, right? Now, apart from investors that are internal, there are foreign supports that are coming in to help Nigeria upgrade its power infrastructure. On the side of the generation, when Obama was in power, he was championing the Power Africa initiative. And they say, okay, they are going to contribute 3 gigawatts of electricity to the national grid, right? And so if you times that by 4, that's the number of terawatts, billions of kilowatts that can be added to the national grid. China is also stepping with counterpart funding. And when it comes to transmission, that's where the biggest challenge is. So we have an installed capacity of 16. Okay, we can generate 12, but our transmission capacity is not so strong to carry the entire 12. The capacity is 7. So there's an investment too by the Africa Development Bank to help with that aspect of the transmission. And then the distribution, where I will talk about an issue as well. The World Bank is helping in that respect. Now, there is a problem with the distribution, which I will talk about, and where the investment would help. But analysis has shown over time that in terms of investing across the value chain, it's less expensive upgrading the transmission segment of it than the other section. So we hope that could deliver relief. So despite decades of past and ongoing efforts, we are still consuming less than the US rich in Nigeria. So these are consumption over a couple of decades: 71, 81, 91, 2001, 2011, 2021. There is no significant change. There may be, but it's not keeping pace with the population growth in the country and the rise in demand. I will talk about the economic side of things in terms of the cost that is causing. So we are still consuming 3 times less than a US rich on average, despite decades. Now, here are some notable challenges. So the first challenge has to do with the distribution side of things. Many consumers claim not to be paying for their bills, right? And even in the UK here, with sophisticated energy system, there are people who still bypass billings and they steal energy. So in Nigeria, stealing of energy costs the suppliers $1.4 billion a year. And when you can get the monies, you don't have enough to invest back in your infrastructure. So that's a big challenge. Now, the second challenge, we've been seeing massive investment in the system, but what's the result? We cannot rule out corruption out of this. And corruption diverts public wealth to private deals, to private pockets. That's what corruption does. It diverts, it reallocates public resources to private pockets. That's what corruption does. And so rather than the government spending the money on infrastructure, private individuals spend the money on themselves. And what do they do? Maybe luxury houses in Dubai, investment for their children, and so on and so forth. So this is the biggest elephant in the room, wrestling against energy. Now, the state of the power sector is costing the country a lot, especially businesses. So there was an estimate by the World Bank that about 2% of Nigeria's GDP is lost to the bad state of the power sector. That's one of the economic crises, right? $26 billion a year. Now, firms in the country have been at the receiving end. There was a claim by Manufacturing Association that nearly 1,000 firms folded up and moved abroad. One of the biggest attractors of foreign direct investment is infrastructure, because infrastructure lowers the average cost of productions. It lowers the marginal cost of production, and as a result, it raises the amount of profit. And power sector is at the core of Nigeria's infrastructure that is very essential for foreign direct investment. And so in the absence of that, investors are looking for a fertile ground that once they sow their seeds of money, it's going to multiply. So if the ground is not fertile, an unfertile ground in this respect is there is no sufficient power supply. So I'm not going to throw capital at a very harsh business environment. So that's why they move their investments abroad. So it's triggering capital flight in a number of ways. Now, some guys did some thorough studies, and one of their conclusions is if you eliminate power shortages, you would boost productivity. boosting productivity means you raise your output without raising your input, right? Yeah, total factor productivity rises. So, and long run wages rises. Now, there's a guy called David McKenzie. He's been a researcher at the World Bank. He was asked to do evaluation of a program in Nigeria. They call it UWIN, or at the time they call it SHOP. It was kind of like conditional cash transfers. Graduates were identified and they were given $50,000 each if they have robust business ideas. And then these business ideas would be funded by these monies saved from subsidy removal at the time. And based on his impact evaluation, he published it on the leading economic journal, American Economic Review. And he said that cash transfer raised the number of jobs, but the number of jobs raised would have been much more had they not encountered serious constraint from the power sector. So power sector is halting growth, is also halting the progress of businesses. And we know that small scale industries and businesses, they're the lifeline of the system. They create jobs for people, and they also generate revenue enough for the government to raise tax revenue from. So they are very essential. So when the power is not in place, you're weakening businesses that are intended to power the economy. So the question is, and this is the question of our thing, can Nigeria achieve A square for all by 2030? Like, can we have universal access and affordability by 2030? Well, I'm not absolutely sure. It depends. But countries such like China, which they're very small in terms of population, are foreign success stories. So this is the only equation in this presentation, and I hope it's going to be straightforward. I just run a linear projection of over 40 years, from 1970 to 2021, or 2022, of how consumption per capita per person has been moving over the past half century. So business as usual is BAU. If business as usual, let's leave things the way they are, the way they have been playing in the past 50 years. Let's just go like that. It's going to take 300 years, more than that, for Nigeria to raise energy consumption level to that minimum of 1,000 we watch in that video. That's if we leave things the way they are. Do nothing scenario. Maybe we leave it to luck. Now, pathways. If we must achieve that, then we must raise the speed of connection to 500,000 or almost 1 million every year. There are 40 million households in the country. So if we connect 1 million or 500,000 every year, these based on estimates by the Africa Development Bank and the World Bank. Then in the side of money, we need $10 billion every year for 10 straight years. That's an enormous amount of money. And that should raise our grid capacity to 213 and be able to evacuate that to end users with minimal losses, right? Germany is trying to intervene at some point. But beyond investment, this is one of the biggest problems here. It's a regulatory framework. The UK has a very strong regulatory framework they call RIO. They match the electricity and the gas sectors together, RIO, revenue, incentive, innovations, and output. The government runs the show at that level, and energy companies are heavily regulated, not just for the benefit of the customers, but for the benefit of the businesses. The regulation is done in such a way that performing companies are incentivized by bonuses. They're incentivized by quite a lot of benefits, right? And once they deliver on their targets, they get rewarded significantly. If they don't deliver on their target based on factors within their own control, they get fined heavily. And no business would want that on its record. So they try to perform. And if the businesses are regulated in a way that they perform very well, their record to the public would be impressive, and a lot of people will be interested in investing in these companies. And that's more capital coming in, and they would reduce how much money they have borrowed in time. They will reduce their loans and increase their equity. In other words, they will reduce how much money they have borrowed and increase how much stake people are having in the businesses.